Hey guys, Dingles here with 5 tips that speedrunners employ that every casual player should utilise. If you take something away from this video, consider subscribing, it'll help me out a bunch. Let's get straight into it. Tip number 1, Zenny. Time is money, and in this game, money is Zenny. If you're strapped for cash and are far along enough in the story to have access to Yoka, both the overworld variant and the net variant, then you can buy untraps from this scientist. What do untraps do? Well, as you progress further into the game, the green mystery darters that spawn on the net start having a chance that viruses are hiding within them. Untraps ensure that when you check a green mystery darter, that you'll never get a virus fight. If you journey to Yoka 1, which is actually the farthest area from the square exit, the GMDs there, the green mystery darters, will always be a Zenny reward. It's a great way to get a bit of cash in the progressing stages of the game, which can help to buy something you've been eyeing off from a dealer. If you're still struggling for Zenny in the mid to later games, then Undernet 2 also has Zenny only GMDs that you should untrap. Tip number 2, pause buffering. This tip is something I never fathomed to do when playing these games as a kid, and even now I need to remind myself to do it more often because of how much easier it can make fights. The pause menu that you can enable during battles can be toggled on and off with a lot of control. This helps tremendously in fights where you have trouble locking down a faster enemy, and is especially great for dodging. For instance, when you fight stronger iterations of enemy Navis like Beastman, he's too fast for me to be able to dodge reactively, so more often than not I would just arbitrarily choose a direction to dodge when I see him leave his area. This can work some of the time, however I'm just as likely to move into where he's attacking from, and because there is collision damage in favour against us, I would end up taking a lot of damage over the course of the fight. Look how much simpler it becomes if I begin to pause buffer at that same crucial moment I talked about earlier when he disappears from his area. The reason I picked Beastman to show off is that he's a great example for me to show because of his tell, the shadow. Now I know his attack spot, I can just queue up the opposite direction and unpause to dodge him effectively. As you progress through the Legacy Collection into games 4, 5 and 6, this method becomes even more beneficial to have in your back pocket, as the Soul and Cross systems that those games employ have some frame-specific power boosts which you can utilise pause buffering to guarantee. Tip number 3, V3, V4 hunting. I remember playing Battle Network as a kid and having a lot of fun hunting the enemy Navis and trying to get the higher versions of their chips. Although the Legacy Collection is hitting that nostalgic vibe, I'm sure a lot of you are realising how taxing it can be to grind and grind just to find the enemy Navi, and then unfortunately there's always the chance that you don't get the coin flip and you just get Zenny as a reward instead of that sweet chip you wanted. Well, here are a few tips to at least reduce that time down. Buy sneak runs from one of the various sub-chip dealers that sell them. There's a scientist beside Mail's house if you can't think of any off the top of your head. Sneak runs will ensure that you only find fights in the upper tier of available fights when you've beaten the V2 version. What I also like to do is bug sneak run by placing it outside of the command line to increase my encounter rate. Save and reset if you find anything other than your target. If you've made it to the end game, then equipping Collect into your Navy cust will circumvent the chance of the Zenny drop. You can find it in the World 3 castle here. In one of my previous videos, I highlighted the benefits of Super Armor. The program actually makes it so that taking damage doesn't interrupt Mega Man and doesn't reduce rank. With these tips in mind, you should have a slightly easier time. It's still going to be a bit of a grind, so good luck and stay strong. Tip number 4, the Bugfrag Grind. Sooner or later, you'll come to the realization that the game uses bug frags as a form of currency in quite a few different areas. There are 2 shops within the game which sell chips in exchange for bug frags. One of them is also where you'll find the highly sought after Giga Chip folder back. One of the more unique features to BN3 is the introduction of viruses as collectible pets, which function as summonable allies in chip form. These little critters become stronger with every 10 bug frags you offer to them as food. And in order to get full completion of the game, you're also required to expend 300 bug frags into the Secret Nets trader in order to summon the second iteration of base. These numbers add up really quickly, so here's how the speedrunners in the Alpha Omega category perform their grind. The tank that spawns during the last legs of the story has virus fights that almost exclusively feature the Canodum 3 virus. The runner loads the Reflect program into Mega Man via their corresponding EX code, and also selects Spreader Star as their reg chip. The spreader will take care of the 30 HP difference they would have if we reflected first. Then they just reflect their Canodums for simple, easy counters. You could also bug Sneak Run to reduce the roaming time between encounters. As the Legacy Collection has introduced Buster Max, there are actually new and different options available to us. This ground is relatively undiscovered, but here's an interesting encounter you can exclusively find if you equip Oil Body within the old TV comp, as long as you've defeated Desert Man Alpha in Beach 1. Another great method that may now be just the fastest option available is to use Buster Max power to farm Dex and Gutsman on the World 3 island at the end of the game. Use the best option available to you for how far along in the story you are, and keep in mind as you progress through the game to aim for those counters. Tip number 5. Folder flow and deck building. I've saved this point for last, as there are a few concepts that blend together to form the overarching concept. At its most basic explanation, folder flow means being able to select multiple chips every turn. To do this, you would need to be using a folder that has only a few varying codes, perhaps 2 or 3 different letters as well as star-coded chips. A folder that has poor folder flow will see you only being able to select 1 or at most 2 chips each turn. In our community, we call folders like this alphabet soup. As the amount of variances in codes in the folder increases, you're unfortunately going to be less likely to be able to select multiple chips. One of the things I don't want to talk you out of, however, is originality and preference. As speedrunners, we actually really love watching people play the game casually, as it's nice to view people play the game with wonder as well as see the unique chips that they run in folders. But let's talk about the main concept of Battle Network. The game plays like most other RPGs, but the real kicker in this series is combat, which is essentially grid-based gameplay with deck building elements. The game really opens up after the Beastman scenario because you get access to the Lotto number trader. The chips within it are on a higher level than most anything you can find naturally at that point. It gives you access to program advances like Master Style that do devastating damage. Regardless of whether you're before or after that point, or even if you don't feel inclined to use the Lotto trader, there are some things to work towards and some things that you might like to steer clear of when choosing how you want to work your folder. So here's tip 5.1, hand lock. One of the common pitfalls I see people get into is having, for example, 3 or 4 different PAs in the folder. What can happen is your hand gets clogged with different components for each and you become unable to use anything for fear of losing the chance at completing the PA, which then leads to you using and cycling just 1 chip per turn. To summarize this point, don't have so many chip combos in your folder that you essentially hand lock yourself with unfinished components you don't want to waste. Tip 5.2, adding. The add feature is one of the most powerful tools at your command. Because of this, having a folder with reduced variance in codes means we can essentially feed in our throwaway chips to hunt for our ace cards or combinations. Unless your opponent is already low, then using these chips for the low to medium damage they offer might not be as great as using them as fodder for the add function. Another tip within this too is to always select as many non-PA or trump component chips that you can add, as the power of the function takes the chips and adds the slot. So each chip you add is in essence played as a draw 2 card. Drawing cards means getting to the meat of your folder quicker, and therefore you'll have a better fight. Tip 5.3, custom gauge. As speedrunners, we would be opening the custom gauge the very instant it becomes available. The only reason we wouldn't is that we still have powerful chips to hit the enemy currently loaded on Mega Man. We do this because, unfortunately in BN3, the buster is a bit lackluster, especially compared to the other game's buster power, so chips are where the game is mainly played. Obviously with the release of the Legacy Collection's Buster Max mode, this is incorrect, but I'm positive that most of you would essentially be playing the game as normal, maybe putting Buster Max on only in the grindy parts or if you get slightly lazy. Once again, however, I want to stress that you should play the game however you like. If you want to run wood style with weapon levels in your Navicuss for big, beautiful buster damage, then do it. Now with these smaller concepts in mind, let's summarize them all nice and concisely. Figure out what the point of your folder is, whatever it may be. If you haven't drawn the components you need, then you should weigh up in your first custom screen whether the chips you have on hand are best used for damaging the enemy down to the range of your trump card or combo, or if they're best used as fodder for the add function. These decisions, coupled with a folder that has a low variance in codes, means you're going to be drawing your trumps more often than not on turn 2. Essentially, if something like this Life Sword PA is what you love, then these tips will get you doing Life Sword more often. Or if creating a folder that breaks panels and then uses Snake with Wood plus 30 is exciting to you, then you'll be doing that more often too. It's all about having your folder set up in a way that gets us to those draws quickly. Full Cust is a chip that really embodies the spirit of this concept. You can select it as your first chip and then tag along the throwaway chips after it and just instantly reopen the folder with a new hand. You can find it in the Undernet Square in white version, or from the Bugfrag trader on Hades Isle in blue version. Chips go in and chips go out. Everything flows nicely into what we want to draw, which is the ultimate goal of folder flow and deck building in Battle Network. Hopefully with this knowledge, your playthrough of BN3 becomes a little easier, and if that's the case, then consider hitting the subscribe button. It'll help me grow and keep all this information coming. Some of the concepts of deck building within BN3 are something I'm quite familiar with, as I'm a collector of board games and I like to play video games like Slay the Spire. Let me know in the comments what your favourite board game and or video game is. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for my next video. Thanks.